Hello everyone, this is Brad Wood, and we're back on another ModCFML video. This one is just like the IIS one, but it is set up with Apache. So, ModCFML is a way that you can use a single solitary CommandBox server to power multiple websites, just like you're used to with the traditional Lucy installation or an Adobe ColdFusion installation, and you can do it with CommandBox. So, it works with IIS via bondcode. It works with Apache via ModCFML, which I'm showing today. It also works via Nginx if you just manually set the headers, which I'll show in the next video. And CommandBox implements the same equivalent functionality as the Tomcat ModCFML valve that you're used to using in Lucy. Okay, again though, this does work with Adobe ColdFusion all the same. You basically need to enable ModCFML in your server.json, set up your shared key, which is basically a password that ensures that only your Apache instance or IIS instance is the one talking to CommandBox. And then, since we're using an AJP proxy, you need to enable AJP in CommandBox as well as set your AJP port. So I did this in IIS in the previous video. I don't have Apache installed on my Windows machine, and I didn't really want to install it. So I started up a Docker container, just running Foundeo Minibox since it already had CommandBox ready. This runs on Alpine Linux, and so I installed Apache 2 into here to try to create a quick and dirty example. Now, Apache has slightly different folder structures, I noticed, in the Alpine installation than it does in Ubuntu. I apologize if that's confusing. Also, I had to custom compile the ModCFML connector because there was not an Alpine binary. That was fairly terrible, and I don't know if I'm ready to talk about it yet. I'm definitely not going to bother trying to show it because it was a bit sticky to do. And for most of you out there, it probably doesn't even apply to you. If you're using Ubuntu or Red Hat Linux, you're probably just grabbing, or CentOS, you're just grabbing one of these pre-built binaries, so you shouldn't need to worry about compiling ModCFML. So I'm just going to gloss over all that, and I'm going to assume that you can probably just use the installation instructions that are here. This is the website. If you just Google for ModCFML, you'll see modcfml.org is the domain that comes up. If you click on it, it just redirects to this viviotech.github.io website. So on the download page is where they have the links to the Apache modules. So they have pre-built ones here for CentOS and Ubuntu, or you can compile them yourselves if you are brave. So this just points to the mod_cfml.so file that ultimately needs to be placed in the modules directory where all of your modules are for Apache. I've kind of crammed everything into just the default configuration for Apache to try to keep this as simple as possible. I've created the same directory structure I did on my previous video with IIS. In the app directory, I have an index.cfm file, which represents my default site, and it just outputs default site and runs some ColdFusion. I have a server.json file where I've enabled ModCFML, I've set the shared key to be my secret, and then I've enabled AJP and set it to port 8009. And that's basically it from the CommandBox perspective. And then I have two folders here, a site1. Oops. Sorry, I keep forgetting Alpine Linux does not have all of my favorite shortcuts that Ubuntu has. I have a site1 and a site2 folder, which just have nothing but an index.cfm, which just outputs site1 or site2. Okay, so those are my three web routes, my default site, site1 and site2. So to quickly go over the Apache configuration, I don't want to get way off in these weeds. Let me back up to the last time. All right, so I have enabled the mod proxy module, and I've configured this. This is straight out of the ModCFML documentation, basically proxying all traffic. And so if CFM or CFC, we're proxying it over to localhost port 8009. So this is what needs to match your CommandBox server. If you've started CommandBox on a different IP address or a different port for AJP, that's fine. Just update this proxy line and you're good. So to jump back over to where the rest of the configuration is, I've just dumped all this in my httpd.conf file. Like I said, the Alpine installation of Apache It's kind of wonky and didn't even have like a available sites or active sites nonsense. So down at the bottom is where I've just put the config. There's not a ton here. So we are loading the modcfml.so module. Again, it's up to you to install that, to download that and put it in the directory. We have our handlers, so it knows what requests to effect. And we have our ModCFML shared key or secret, which needs to match whatever's in your server.json. This module here sits on top of the built-in mod proxy module in Apache. And for any requests that are being proxied that are a CFM, a CFC, or a CFML file, it's going to add in the special HTTP request headers that the ModCFML implementation in CommandBox will be looking for. So I've defined 3 incredibly minimalistic virtual hosts here in Apache. I have my default one, which just points to our app directory as the document root. And then I have site.com, site1.com, which points to our site1 folder, and site2.com, which points to our site2 folder. So super duper simple. You typically probably would not have these virtual hosts just right here in the httpd.conf file. You would probably have these in some separate files, but I wanted us to make this just as simple as possible. So Apache is aware of 3 different sites, and ModCFML is being loaded and is configured with our shared secret. So let's go ahead and jump into CommandBox, where I will start up our CommandBox server, and then I will show you hitting all of these sites, which is pretty simple. So I'm going to start with debug on, so we can see some of those debugging messages. I'm going to do a console start. That way we can see the details of the deployments in the console logs. All right, server's up. Love how fast that is. So when I started, here I'll just show you real quick. When I started up MiniBox for my demo, I kept a giant list of all the notes of the nonsense I was running. I used this command right here, docker run finding MiniBox, and I'm mapping port 80 from my host machine through inside the Docker container. So that's important. That means that on my local machine, when I just visit localhost on port 80, that's hitting Apache inside of my little Docker container where I have this example set up. And Apache is proxying through to our default site, which is defined in the app folder, and we're running Cold Fusion code via Lucy. So here in our CommandBox logs, we can see that localhost was requested. I should actually show that. I'll show you afterwards because I need to stop this console server to jump back into the Apache logs. The one additional piece of setup I did do in Apache is I set index.cfm as a default document, an index, and that makes that run by default. Okay, so it created a deployment for us in /app, which corresponds with the web root of the default site in Apache, and deployed a new servlet context for Lucy to run in. And then, furthermore, if we go to site1.com, which I have, I have an entry in my localhost file, which just repoints site1.com to localhost. Here we go. Apache recognizes that as our second virtual host, which is set up, which points to the site1 subfolder. And here in the CommandBox logs, we can see we requested site1.com, and we created a brand new deployment for site1, whose web root is app/site1, exactly like we wanted to see. And then, if I go to site2.com, again, I have a host file in my local, or an entry in my local host file pointing this back to localhost. We can see we're hitting site2, and our CommandBox logs show we created a fresh deployment whose web root is app/site2. So that's basically it. It can take a little bit of fiddling just to get all the pieces in place, but really it's all about having mod proxy set up and enabled, installing the ModCFML module, adding a little boilerplate to your Apache configuration that loads ModCFML, has the secret key, and then as long as ModCFML is active in CommandBox, that ModCFML module in Apache sends across all the HTTP headers that need to exist, and it'll automatically create those deployments. Okay, as promised, let me jump out of CommandBox real quick and back over to the Apache configuration file. There's one thing I didn't show you, because I set it up at a global level, which means it was a little bit higher up here in the file. Because I put it in here, so it just apply to all sites. Here we go. So by default, Apache had the only directory index file I was looking for was index.html. I also added directory index index.cfm. And that's what makes it so when I hit a folder without any file, it automatically loads that index.cfm file right there. That's the only other missing piece. Okay, that's pretty much it. The Apache setup looks exactly like it would if you weren't using CommandBox. If you were doing this with the typical like Lucy installation, you would have the exact same Apache setup that you would here. There's nothing specific to CommandBox and how Apache's configured. This is exactly like you would normally configure ModCFML on Apache. The only difference is instead of talking to Tomcat, it's talking to instead of talking to Tomcat with the ModCFML Tomcat valve enabled, it's talking to CommandBox with just the built-in ModCFML setting active. Okay, hopefully that'll get you guys pointed in the right direction. Again, the docs for ModCFML are here on commandbox.ordisbooks.com. The docs for ModCFML are here at, I think it was modcfml.net, but it redirects to this Viviotech site. This is where you can download and get the installation instructions on the Apache ModCFML module. Okay, guys. Happy Apacheing, and I'll see you all next time.